The late afternoon sun hung low in the sky, casting long, lazy shadows across the cracked sidewalks of the old neighborhood. For Zara, it was a landscape painted with the colors of memory. The peeling paint on the row houses was the same shade of faded blue she remembered from her childhood. The rhythmic bounce of a basketball on a patch of worn asphalt was the soundtrack to countless summers. She was here to visit her mother, Beverly. A trip she tried to make every few weeks, a pilgrimage back to the place that had built her. Even as her life had carried her far away, Zara's world now was one of federal buildings, coded files, and the quiet, intense focus of her work with the FBI here. The world moved at a different pace, slower, more familiar, but with its own undercurrents she had long since learned to read. Her mother had sent her on a simple mission. "Honey, I'm out of that ginger tea I like. The good stuff." From Mr. Hassan's store was a small errand, a perfect excuse to stretch her legs and breathe in the air of her old street. Zara pulled the front door closed behind her, the familiar click of the latch a comforting sound. As she walked, she didn't just see the neighborhood. She analyzed it, a habit she couldn't turn off. She noticed the new security camera on the lamppost, a city initiative she'd read about in a brief. She saw the group of teenagers on the corner, their postures loud, but their faces young, more interested in their phones than any trouble. She nodded to Mrs. Gable, who was watering her petunias, and received a warm, toothless smile in return. This was the world her mother still inhabited, a world of small courtesies and quiet routines, a world Zara fought to protect. Even if from a distance, Mr. Hassan's corner store was an institution, a beacon of convenience and community. The bell above the door jingled a cheerful, slightly off-key tune as she entered. The air inside was thick with the scent of incense, fried food, and old paper. Mr. Hassan, a man whose face was a roadmap of worries and smiles, was behind the counter. He looked up, his eyes crinkling. "Aisha, my favorite customer's daughter. How's your mother?" Zara smiled back, a genuine warmth spreading through her chest. "She's good, Mr. Hassan. She sent me for her ginger tea." "Ah, of course," he said, shuffling towards a high shelf. "The good stuff. I save it for her." He was a kind man, an immigrant who had poured his life into this small shop, working from dawn until dusk to provide for a family back home. Zara had always liked him. As he reached for the box of tea, the little bell over the door jingled again. But this time the sound was swallowed by a sudden, heavy silence that fell over the small store. Zara didn't need to turn around to know who it was. She felt the shift in the atmosphere, a drop in temperature that had nothing to do with the weather. She saw the change in Mr. Hassan's posture. His shoulders, which had been relaxed, suddenly hunched. His smile vanished, replaced by a tight, nervous mask. He moved with a jerky, unnatural speed, placing the tea on the counter. Zara turned slowly, her body coiling with a trained, instinctive readiness. Standing in the doorway was a police officer. He wasn't just any officer. He filled the space with his presence. He was a big man, broad-shouldered, with a thick neck that strained against the collar of his uniform. His name was Frank Rizzo, though Zara didn't know that yet. What she did know, what she could read in the set of his jaw and the arrogant swagger in his step, was that this was a man who was deeply comfortable with his own power. He wasn't here to buy a pack of gum. He was here on business. Rizzo's eyes, small and piggy, scanned the store. Dismissing Zara in an instant before landing on Mr. Hassan, he didn't speak. He just walked to the counter, his heavy boots thudding on the linoleum floor. He leaned an elbow on the counter, right next to the box of ginger tea, and leaned in close. Zara stood perfectly still a few feet away, becoming part of the scenery. She knew that to move or speak now would be to insert herself into a situation that required observation, not intervention. Her training took over, a cold, clear lens clicking into place. She was no longer just Beverly's daughter. She was a witness. "You know what day it is, don't you, Hassan?" Rizzo's voice was a low rumble, a quiet growl that was far more menacing than a shout. Mr. Hassan wouldn't meet his eyes. He stared at the counter, his hands fidgeting with the stack of lottery tickets. "Officer, please. Business is slow this week. The tourists, they are not coming." Rizzo let out a soft, humorless chuckle. It was a sound full of contempt. Tourists. I don't care about tourists. I care about my neighborhood. And I care about making sure this neighborhood stays safe. From fires, from break-ins, from all sorts of unfortunate accidents. He paused, letting the threat hang in the air, thick and suffocating. It costs money to keep a place safe, you know? Mr. Hassan nodded miserably. A quick, jerky motion. Yes, officer. I understand. Zara watched every detail. The way Rizzo's thumb hooked into his belt right next to his gun, the slight sheen of sweat on Mr. Hassan's upper lip, the way the other customers who had been in the store suddenly found reasons to leave, their footsteps scurrying out the door. This was a well-rehearsed performance. Rizzo was a predator, and Mr. Hassan was his prey. The dance was familiar to both of them, with a sigh that was meant to sound like a great burden. Mr. Hassan reached under the counter. His hand trembled slightly as he pulled out a thick white envelope. He didn't look at Rizzo as he slid it across the counter. It was a silent, shameful transaction. Rizzo took the envelope, his thick fingers making it look small and flimsy. He hefted it in his palm, as if weighing it, then casually slipped it into his breast pocket right over his heart. The irony was not lost on Zara. That's a good start, Rizzo said, his voice dripping with condescension. He straightened up, adjusting his belt. I'll be back next week. Maybe try and have a little more for me then. For the sake of the neighborhood. He gave Mr. Hassan a final, hard look, a look that said, I own you. Then turned to leave, and that's when he saw her. For the first time, Rizzo really looked at her. He had dismissed her when he came in, just another face in the crowd. But now, as he was leaving, he saw her stillness. He saw the calm, unblinking way she was watching him. He saw a woman who had seen everything. And in his world, a witness was a problem. His eyes narrowed. He didn't see a federal agent. He didn't see a highly trained law enforcement officer. He saw a black woman. And in his twisted, prejudiced worldview, that was a person who should be afraid. Who should be looking at the floor, not meeting his gaze with a level, unreadable expression. Her lack of fear was an insult. Her quiet observation was an act of defiance. He stopped, his bulk blocking the doorway. The jingle of the bell seemed to mock the sudden, tense silence. He stared at her, his eyes moving slowly up and down her body. It wasn't a look of attraction. It was an assessment, a predator sizing up a new kind of prey. He was trying to intimidate her, to make her look away, to break her composure. Zara didn't flinch. She held his gaze, her own face a mask of neutral calm. Inside, her mind was racing, cataloging every detail. The shape of his nose, the color of his eyes, the way his uniform was perfectly pressed except for a slight fraying on the cuff of his right sleeve. She saw the badge number on his chest. 714. She memorized it. She didn't see a man. She saw a case file beginning to form. Rizzo's lips twisted into a sneer. He saw her defiance as ignorance, as a challenge. He thought he had her figured out. He thought he could break her. He took a slow step towards her, then another, his boots thudding on the floor, closing the distance between them. He stopped just a foot away, invading her personal space, trying to tower over her. He said nothing. He just looked, letting the silence stretch, letting his presence do the talking. It was a promise. Asterisk, I see you. I know where you are, and I'm going to make you regret this. Asterisk then, just as slowly. He raised his right hand and deliberately tapped the butt of his service pistol. It was a small gesture, but it screamed a single, clear message. Asterisk, I have the power. I have the gun. Your life is in my hands. Asterisk, he held her gaze for another long second, a smirk playing on his lips, confident that he had made his point. Then he turned and walked out the door. Leaving the bell to jingle merrily in his wake, the silence that followed was heavy. Mr. Hassan let out a long, shuddering breath as if he'd been holding it the entire time. He looked at Zara, his eyes filled with a mixture of pity and fear. You should not have looked at him, miss, he whispered, his voice trembling. "You should have just looked away." Zara finally broke her stillness. She gave Mr. Hassan a soft, reassuring smile, a stark contrast to the cold focus of moments before. "I'm fine," she said, her voice calm and steady. She placed a few dollars on the counter for the tea. "Keep the change." As she took the box and turned to leave, Mr. Hassan called after her, "Be careful. That man? He's a bad man. He enjoys hurting people." Zara nodded, her expression unreadable. "I know." She walked out of the store and into the warm afternoon air. But the neighborhood felt different now. The long shadows seemed to hold new threats. The friendly faces now seemed like potential witnesses or potential victims. The seed of a vendetta had been planted, not in her mind, but in the mind of Officer Frank Rizzo. He thought he had marked her, targeted her for some future act of petty cruelty. He had no idea that he had just sealed his own fate. He had no idea that the woman he tried to intimidate with a cheap threat and a tap on his gun was the one person in this city he should have been truly afraid of. She wasn't a victim. She was the FBI, and his corruption had just found its way to the top of her to-do list. Asterisk, the days that followed were quiet, but not peaceful. For Zara, it was the feeling of a storm gathering just over the horizon, the air thick and heavy before the downpour. She had returned to her own life, her small, neat apartment in a different part of the city, but the encounter at the corner store clung to her like a stubborn fog. She knew men like Officer Rizzo. They were bullies who used a badge as a shield and a weapon, their power fueled by the fear of others. She had assumed, perhaps naively, that the silent stare-down in the store would be the end of it. She had been wrong. The first sign was a parking ticket, tucked neatly under the windshield wiper of her car. It was parked legally, a fact she confirmed with a quick glance at the faded street sign. The violation was for blocking a fire hydrant, a hydrant that was a full 20 feet away. It was a petty, ridiculous lie. A normal person would be annoyed, maybe angry. Zara felt a cold click of recognition. She took out her phone, snapped a clear photo of her car, the hydrant and the ticket, making sure the officer's name and badge number were legible. Then she calmly put the ticket in her glove compartment and went about her day. She didn't pay it. She didn't contest it. She just filed it away, both physically and in her mind. This was the first move in a game she hadn't agreed to play. A week later, the game escalated. She was driving back from the grocery store when the familiar flashing lights appeared in her rearview mirror. She pulled over, her hands on the steering wheel, her breathing even. A squad car pulled up behind her, and a figure got out, walking slowly to her driver's side window. It was him, Rizzo. He didn't have his partner with him this time. It was just the two of them, alone on the side of the road. He rapped on her window with his knuckle, a sharp, commanding sound. She lowered it. "Good afternoon, officer," she said, her voice neutral. "License and registration," he grunted. Not looking at her face, but at her car's interior. As if searching for something to find, she handed him the documents. He took them and walked back to his car, leaving her sitting in the sudden silence. She knew the drill. He was running her plates, checking for warrants, trying to find any little thing he could use against her. She also knew he was making her wait, another small act of power designed to make her feel small and helpless. After 10 long minutes, he returned. He held her license between his thumb and forefinger. "Zara," he said, reading her name aloud for the first time. "What are you doing in this part of town? This is a nice neighborhood. People here like to feel safe." "I live nearby, officer," she replied, her tone still perfectly level. "Is there a problem?" "The problem is, I see a car that doesn't belong here. It's driven by someone I've seen before," he said, leaning down, his face close to the window. His breath smelled of stale coffee. "I saw you at Hassan's store, watching things. People who mind their own business don't have to watch so hard." "I was just buying tea for my mother," she said. "Is that right?" He sneered. "Well, let me give you some advice. Next time you're buying tea, try looking at the floor. Or the wall. Anywhere but at a police officer. It's disrespectful. And disrespect. It makes me think you're hiding something." He was trying to provoke her to get a reaction. An angry outburst, a scared stammer, anything he could use to justify his harassment. Zara simply looked at him, her expression unchanged. I understand, officer. Is there anything else? I have groceries in the back. He stared at her, his eyes hard, trying to break through her calm. He couldn't. For a moment, a flicker of something else crossed his face. Not defeat, but a deeper, more resentful anger. Her lack of fear was a greater insult than any challenge she could have shouted. He handed her back her license and registration, shoving them into her hands. Get out of here, he said, his voice low and dangerous. And watch yourself. As she drove away, she glanced in her rearview mirror. He was still standing there, watching her car disappear down the street. She reached over and tapped the screen of her phone, stopping the voice recording she had started the moment the lights flashed behind her. Another piece of evidence. Another move on the board, but Rizzo was just getting started. His attempts to get to her directly were failing. She was a stone wall. So, he decided to attack the foundation. He found her mother's address. It wasn't hard. One late evening, around 11 o'clock, Beverly's doorbell rang, insistent and loud. She was in her nightgown watching the news. Worried, she peeked through the peephole and saw 2 police officers. She opened the door, her heart pounding. It was Rizzo, and a younger, nervous-looking officer. Mrs. Davis, Rizzo said, his voice a parody of concern. We received a call about a disturbance at this address. A welfare check. Just wanted to make sure everything was all right in here. Beverly was confused and frightened. A disturbance? Officer, there's no one here but me. I was just watching TV. Are you sure? Rizzo said, craning his neck to look past her into the house. Sometimes people are too scared to report a problem. Is there someone in here with you? Someone who's making you feel unsafe? No, Beverly said, her voice trembling. There's no one. Well, all right then, Rizzo said, though he made no move to leave. Just doing our job, ma'am. Keeping the neighborhood safe. You have a good night now. He gave her a long, lingering look before he and his partner finally turned and walked away. Beverly closed the door and locked it. Her hands shaking, she immediately called Zara. Zara listened, her face hardening into a mask of cold fury as her mother recounted the story. This was different. This wasn't a parking ticket or a traffic stop. This was psychological warfare, an act of pure intimidation designed to terrorize an elderly woman. He was trying to send a message, and he had. The message was that no one around her was safe. It's okay, Mom, Zara said, her voice a steady anchor in the storm of her mother's fear. Don't worry. I'm going to handle it. Did you get their names? No, honey. I was too scared. It's okay. I know who it was. After hanging up, Zara sat in the dark of her living room for a long time. The line had been crossed. She could have handled this quietly, building her case until she had enough to bury Rizzo and his entire corrupt unit. But now it was personal. Now it was about her mother's peace of mind. She thought about calling internal affairs, but the thought died as quickly as it came. She knew from her own work how that went. Complaints against cops like Rizzo, especially from people in her mother's neighborhood, were filed away and forgotten. His unit was known for being a closed circle, a blue wall that protected its own. A formal complaint would only alert him and make him more careful, or worse, more aggressive. No, she wouldn't give him that warning. She would handle this her way. She opened her laptop and began to type. She created a secure, encrypted file. She titled it simply Rizzo. Into it, she uploaded the photo of the parking ticket, the transcript of the traffic stop recording, and her detailed notes from the conversation with her mother. She was no longer just gathering evidence. She was preparing a case. A federal case. Meanwhile, across town, Rizzo was sitting in a diner with his partner, a younger officer named Miller. Rizzo stabbed a fry into a puddle of ketchup, his jaw tight with frustration. She's not scared, he growled. The woman from the store. I pulled her over. I gave her the whole speech. Nothing. She just looked at me like I was talking about the weather. Maybe she's just one of those tough types, Miller offered. Chewing his own burger. No, Rizzo said, shaking his head. It's more than that. It's like she's laughing at me. I even went to her mother's house tonight. A little welfare check. Scared the old lady good. But I get a call from my source later. And the daughter, she's not even calling to complain. She's doing nothing. Miller looked nervous. Frank, maybe you should let it go. We got the cash from Hassan. We don't need this extra heat. Rizzo slammed his fist on the table, making the salt and pepper shakers jump. Heat. There is no heat. Because she's not doing anything? And that's the problem. Her silence is a problem. It means she thinks she's better than us. It means she thinks she's untouchable. I can't have that. I can't have someone in my neighborhood looking at me like that and getting away with it. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. The small stuff isn't working. It's time to end this. For good, Miller swallowed hard. What are you talking about, Frank? I'm talking about making her disappear, Rizzo said, a cruel smile spreading across his face. Not literally. We'll just make her disappear into the system. We'll plant something on her. Something big. Enough to put her away for a long, long time. By the time she figures out what happened, her life will be ruined. No one will ever believe her story. She'll just be another statistic. Miller's face went pale. Frank, that's a frame-up. That's serious. We're serious cops, Miller. We do what's necessary to protect our streets, Rizzo said, his eyes gleaming with a dangerous light. And right now, she's the threat. We'll use one of our C's to make an anonymous tip. We'll get a warrant. We'll make it clean. She wants to be a witness? I'll give her something to see. He sat back, his mind already racing, putting the pieces of his wicked plan together. He had misread Zara's calm completely. He thought it was the silence of a victim, frozen in fear. He had no idea it was the quiet, methodical focus of a hunter, patiently waiting for the perfect moment to strike. He thought he was about to ruin a black woman's life. He had no idea he was digging his own grave. Asterisk, the plan, in Rizzo's mind, was a thing of beauty. It was simple, clean, and brutal. He spent the next few days putting the pieces in place with the confidence of a man who had never faced real consequences. He called one of his regular confidential informants a nervous drug user named Leo, who was terrified of going back to prison. Rizzo laid out the story, feeding Leo the lines he needed to say. You saw a woman matching her description making a deal. A big one. Heroin. You saw her take a package into her mother's house? Leo. Desperate for the cash Rizzo promised and the favor he was calling in, repeated the words until they sounded like his own memory. With this fabricated testimony, Rizzo went to a judge he knew. A man who was famously tough on drugs and rarely questioned the word of a police officer. He painted a picture of a dangerous drug dealer operating out of a quiet residential home, a poisoner of the community. The judge, convinced he was protecting the city, signed the no-knock warrant. It was the key Rizzo needed. He now had the legal authority to kick in the door of Zara's mother's home, guns blazing. He and Miller went over the plan one last time in the squad car. We go in hard and fast, Rizzo instructed, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. She won't know what hit her. By the time she's on the floor in handcuffs, the package will be in the closet, and she'll be on her way to a world of hurt. No one will ever believe her word over ours. What Rizzo didn't know, couldn't possibly know, was that his every move was being watched. The moment he had started making calls, using police resources to track down Zara's mother's address, he had tripped a silent alarm. Zara, after the disturbing welfare check on her mother, hadn't just filed notes in a computer. She had made a call. She had contacted her direct superior at the FBI, a seasoned agent named Thompson, and laid out the entire situation. She didn't just report harassment. She reported a pattern of escalating intimidation from a potentially corrupt officer who had now identified her as a target. Thompson, recognizing the danger, didn't hesitate. He authorized a small, off-the-books surveillance operation. They didn't have enough for a full investigation yet, but they had enough to watch Rizzo's back. A team of federal agents, working in shifts, had been monitoring Rizzo's communications and movements for 48 hours. They heard the call to the informant. They saw him go to the judge. They knew about the warrant the second it was signed. Zara was informed immediately. The trap Rizzo was setting for her had become a trap she was setting for him. The night of the raid, Zara was not at her own apartment. She was at her mother's house, sitting at the very same kitchen table where she had shared so many meals as a child. Beverly was safely away, staying with a friend, convinced by Zara that a sudden, urgent trip out of town was necessary. The house was quiet, but it was not empty. It was a stage, and Zara was waiting for the actors to arrive. She wasn't scared. There was no room for fear, only a cold, clear focus. She had made a pot of coffee, the rich, bitter smell filling the small house. On the table in front of her, next to a plain white mug, sat a small digital recorder, its red light blinking silently. It was a simple, almost theatrical gesture, but it was for her own benefit. A marker of this moment. It was still dark, the time just before the sun begins to think about rising, when the silence was shattered. It wasn't a knock. It was a violent explosion of sound as a heavy battering ram splintered the front door. In the same instant, the windows were filled with the blinding flash of stun grenades. The air crackled with deafening noise and disorienting light. It was a tactic designed to overwhelm the senses, to terrify and incapacitate anyone inside before they could even think to react. Heavily armed figures in black armor swarmed into the house, their boots thundering on the floor. "Police, get on the ground. Hands where I can see them." The commands were screamed, overlapping, creating a wall of sound. They expected chaos. They expected a screaming woman, maybe a desperate attempt to flush evidence or flee for a back window. They found none of that. As the tactical team cleared the rooms with military precision, they converged on the kitchen, and there they stopped. There was a moment of utter confusion. In the center of the room, at the small wooden table, sat Zara. She was not on the floor. She was not screaming. She was sitting upright, perfectly calm, a cup of coffee in her hands. She took a slow, deliberate sip, her eyes tracking the movements of the masked men who had invaded her home. The only light in the room came from the harsh flashlights attached to their rifles, which danced around the walls, making the shadows jump and twist. Rizzo was the last one in, pushing past his own men. He wanted to see the look on her face, the moment of terror and defeat. But what he saw stopped him in his tracks. He saw her sitting there, untouched by the chaos, her expression not of fear but of mild, almost bored observation. It was as if they were an unexpected interruption to her quiet morning. Miller, looking pale and sick behind his helmet, moved to the hall closet as planned. He opened the door, reached in with a gloved hand, and pulled out a brick-sized package wrapped in brown paper. He held it up, his voice shaky. "Got it, Frank, I got it here." Triumphant, cruel smile spread across Rizzo's face. This was it, the moment of victory. He strode into the kitchen, his boots loud on the linoleum. He looked down at Zara, savoring what he thought was his power. "Well, well, well," he said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "Looks like your little tea party is over. You're in a world of trouble now." Zara finally put her mug down. She looked up at him, her eyes clear and steady. "Are you done, officer?" she asked, her voice quiet but cutting through the tension. Rizzo laughed, a short, ugly sound. "Oh, I'm just getting started. You have the right to remain silent." He never finished the sentence. From outside the house, a voice boomed, amplified by a loudspeaker so powerful it made the windows vibrate. It was a voice of absolute authority, a voice that brooked no argument. "FBI, this house is surrounded. You are all under federal surveillance. Lay down your weapons and place your hands on your head. Do I tea now?" The effect was instantaneous. The air, which had been thick with Rizzo's arrogance, suddenly turned to ice. The members of the tactical team froze, their trained minds trying to process this impossible command. They were the police. They were the ones in charge. Who is the FBI to give them orders? Rizzo's face went through a series of rapid changes. The triumphant smirk vanished, replaced by confusion, then disbelief, and finally, a dawning, soul-crushing horror. He slowly turned his head towards the shattered front door. As if he could see through the walls to the world outside, the front door, which his team had just destroyed, was filled with the silhouette of a new figure. This person wasn't in tactical gear. He was in a simple suit, a federal badge hanging around his neck. Behind him, the yard was filled with armed agents in blue jackets with FBI stenciled in bright yellow letters. They were positioned strategically, their rifles aimed not at the house, but at the police officers inside. The man in the suit stepped into the house, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to the chaos. He looked at Zara and gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. Then he turned his gaze to Rizzo. "Officer Frank Rizzo," the agent said, his voice calm and measured. "You and your men will lower your weapons. You are now suspects in a federal corruption investigation. The game is over." Rizzo stood there, his mind refusing to accept what was happening. The package in Miller's hand suddenly felt like a burning coal. The witness he had tried to intimidate, the woman he had tried to frame and ruin, was not a victim at all. She was the architect of his destruction. The trap he had so carefully laid had been a mirror, reflecting his own crimes back at him. And in that horrifying moment of clarity, he finally understood. He hadn't been hunting her. He had been led right into the cage. The silence that followed the federal agent's words was heavier than any sound. In the small kitchen, the world had tilted on its axis. The heavily armed police officers, who had been the apex predators just moments before, now stood frozen, their weapons feeling suddenly foreign and dangerous in their hands. They were the hunters. But the tables had been turned so completely, so brutally, that they were still processing the reality of their new position as prey. Rizzo was the first to break the stillness, but not with compliance. His face, a mottled purple with rage and shock, twisted into a snarl. "This is a mistake. You have no right. We're on a sanctioned police operation. Get out of my way." He took a threatening step towards the agent in the suit, his hand still hovering near his sidearm. The agent Thompson didn't even flinch. He simply raised a hand, and from the doorway, 2 more FBI agents stepped forward. Their rifles raised and aimed squarely at Rizzo's chest. "Officer," Thompson said, his voice losing its calm edge and taking on a tone of cold steel, "I will not ask you again. Drop your weapon. You are now facing federal charges for obstruction of justice, conspiracy, and evidence tampering, and that's just for starters. Do not make this worse." The threat was real. The look in the agent's eyes was one of unwavering resolve. Rizzo, for the first time in a long time, was facing a power he could not bully, a system he could not corrupt. With a sound of pure frustration, a guttural growl that ripped from his throat, he slowly unbuckled his duty belt and let it clatter to the floor. His gun, the symbol of his power, lay impotent on the linoleum. One by one, his men followed suit, their faces masks of disbelief and terror. Miller was the first to sob, a quiet, pathetic sound as he sank to his knees. Zara watched it all, her expression unreadable. She stood up from the table, placing her coffee mug down with a soft click. She walked over to Miller, who was still clutching the package of planted heroin. She gently took it from his trembling hands. "Thank you, officer," she said, her voice devoid of any emotion. "We'll take that as evidence." The irony was so thick it was almost suffocating. The walk of shame out of the house was a spectacle. As Rizzo and his team were led out in handcuffs, the neighborhood was coming alive. Curtains twitched. Doors cracked open. People who had lived in fear of this man for years now watched. Wide-eyed as he was paraded down the street. A disgraced cop being frog-marched by the FBI, whispers turned to murmurs, then to a quiet, collective gasp. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated catharsis for the community. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a new light on the old street, a light that seemed to wash away a long shadow. Back at the police precinct, the news landed like a nuclear bomb. The first reports were confused. Fragments of radio chatter about a federal takedown of a narcotics unit. Then the names started to filter in. Rizzo, Miller. The entire tactical team. Panic spread like wildfire. Officers who had been Rizzo's friends suddenly couldn't remember his name. Those who had benefited from his corruption began quietly shredding documents and deleting files. The blue wall, that impenetrable fortress of silence and protection, was not just cracking. It was shattering from the inside out. The precinct chief, a man who had looked the other way for years, locked his office door and called a lawyer. The empire Rizzo had built was collapsing not with a bang, but with the terrified whispers of guilty men. At the FBI field office, the atmosphere was electric but controlled. Zara was no longer just a victim or a witness. She was the lead on the case that was about to become the Bureau's biggest priority in the city. She sat in a conference room, a whiteboard behind her already filling up with names, dates, and connections. The parking ticket, the transcript of the traffic stop, the recording of her mother's frightened call. They were no longer just pieces of personal harassment. They were the first threads in a massive, tangled web of corruption. Her team worked around the clock. They pulled Rizzo's financial records, tracing unexplained deposits and lavish spending that far exceeded his salary. They interviewed other business owners in the neighborhood, men and women who had been shaken down by Rizzo for years. Emboldened by his arrest, they began to talk. Mr. Hassan was the first, and his testimony was damning. He provided dates, amounts, and details of the extortion, confirming the scene Zara had witnessed in his store. The planted heroin was the key that unlocked everything. It gave them the leverage to flip lower-level officers and informants, who, when faced with decades in federal prison, began to sing like canaries. The investigation spiraled outward, exposing a network of corruption that went far beyond one dirty cop. It involved evidence tampering in major criminal cases, allowing violent offenders to walk free. It involved a system of payoffs and protection that had poisoned the entire precinct. Old cases were being reopened. Convictions were being overturned. The city was forced to confront the ugly truth that the people sworn to protect them had been preying on them. It was a seismic event, and Zara was at the epicenter. In a stark, gray interrogation room, Rizzo finally faced the music. He sat across a metal table from Thompson and Zara, his arrogance stripped away, leaving only a hollow, frightened man. For hours, he blustered and threatened, claiming it was all a setup, a conspiracy. But Zara was patient. She laid out the evidence piece by piece. The recording of him shaking down Mr. Hassan, the financial records, the testimony of his own partner, Miller, who had broken down and confessed everything in exchange for a plea deal. Finally, Zara slid a single photograph across the table. It was a still from the traffic stop camera, showing Rizzo tapping his gun. "You thought this was power?" she said, her voice quiet but firm. "You thought this made you strong. You thought you could intimidate people, ruin their lives, and no one would ever stop you. You saw my mother, and you saw a target. You saw me, and you saw a problem you could erase. You never once stopped to think that you were the problem. And now, you're going to prison for a very long time. Not because you're a dirty cop, but because you underestimated the wrong person." Rizzo looked at the photo, then at Zara. The last of his defiance crumbled, replaced by the stark, cold reality of his situation. He slumped in his chair, a broken man. The empire was gone. The power was gone. All that was left was the reckoning. And as he was led away in handcuffs for the last time, Zara felt not triumph, but a quiet sense of resolution. The storm she had felt gathering on the horizon had finally broken. And in its wake, there was the possibility of something new, a chance for real justice. 6 months later, the city felt different. The trial of Frank Rizzo and his co-conspirators had been a media spectacle. A daily drama played out on news channels and in the papers. For weeks, the city was forced to look at the rot festering within its own police department. Zara had taken the stand, her testimony calm and precise. She didn't speak with anger or a desire for revenge. She simply laid out the facts, the timeline of harassment, the methodical way she had documented his crimes. When the prosecutor asked her why she didn't just go to internal affairs, she explained her reasoning in a way everyone could understand. "I knew from my experience that complaints against officers like Mr. Rizzo often disappeared. I also knew that to truly stop the corruption, you couldn't just cut off one head of the Hydra. You had to expose the entire body. My goal wasn't just to report one bad officer. It was to dismantle the system that protected him." Her words hung in the silent courtroom. a quiet declaration of war against a deeply ingrained problem. Rizzo, seated at the defense table, had glared at her throughout, his face a mask of impotent rage. He saw his life unraveling with every word she spoke. The evidence was insurmountable: the recordings, the financial trails, the testimony of his former partners who had chosen to save themselves. The jury was out for less than 2 hours. The guilty verdicts on all counts were a foregone conclusion. The judge, a woman known for her stern sentences, looked down at Rizzo before delivering her final words. "You swore an oath to protect and serve, but you used your badge as a weapon to prey on the very people you were meant to defend. You didn't just break the law. You poisoned the trust this community places in law enforcement. There is no greater betrayal." The sentence was decades in federal prison, a long, cold stretch of time that would ensure he would never again wear a uniform or hold power over another human being. The collapse of Rizzo's empire sent shockwaves through the police department. The precinct was placed under federal oversight, a team of auditors and investigators combing through years of cases. Several other officers were implicated and forced to resign or face their own trials. The old guard, the ones who had looked the other way, were pushed into early retirement. It was a painful, messy process, but it was a necessary cleansing. New leadership was brought in, a chief from another city with a reputation for integrity and reform. Slowly, painstakingly, the work of rebuilding trust began. For Zara, the experience had forged her in fire. She was no longer just a field agent. She had been promoted to a position she never would have expected. She was now heading up a new federal task force dedicated specifically to public corruption and police misconduct. Her office was no longer just a cubicle, a space with a large conference table and a whiteboard covered in names and connections. The work was harder, more complex, but it felt more vital than ever. She had seen up close and personal the damage a single dirty officer could do. Now, she had the resources and the authority to hunt them down, not just one at a time, but in the systems that allowed them to thrive. But the most profound changes were felt, not in the courthouse or the FBI building, but on the quiet streets of the old neighborhood. The fear that had hung in the air like a persistent smog had begun to lift. People walked with a little more ease. They talked to their neighbors a little more freely. Mr. Hassan's corner store was brighter. He had painted the faded trim a cheerful yellow and had put a small pot of flowers by the door. He no longer flinched every time a squad car drove by. Instead, he would often stand outside chatting with customers, his smile genuine and easy. One sunny afternoon, Zara was visiting her mother. Beverly was sitting on her front porch, shelling peas into a large bowl. The neighborhood was alive with the sounds of summer. The rhythmic thwack of a jump rope, the distant wail of an ice cream truck, the laughter of children playing in a sprinkler. "It feels lighter here, doesn't it?" Beverly said, looking up at her daughter as she sat down beside her. Zara nodded, a soft smile on her face. "It does, Mom. It really does." "I still can't believe it," Beverly said, her voice filled with a lingering sense of wonder. "That man, the one who came to my door, to think he's gone for good? It's like a storm passed over." "Ass!" "The storm is over," Zara said softly. She reached over and squeezed her mother's hand. "And the sun is out." As they sat in comfortable silence, Zara saw Mr. Hassan locking up his store for the day. He looked over and saw them, and his face broke into a wide, warm smile. He gave a small, respectful bow in their direction. Zara smiled back and raised a hand in a wave. It was a simple gesture, but it was filled with a deep, unspoken gratitude. They were survivors of the same storm, bound together by an experience that had changed them both. Later that evening, as the sky turned a soft shade of purple, Zara decided to take a walk by herself. She walked the same path she had taken on the day it all started. She passed the bodega, now brightly lit and welcoming. She passed the corner where the teenagers still gathered, their laughter echoing in the twilight. She felt a sense of peace she hadn't realized she'd been missing. This place, her mother's neighborhood, was no longer a symbol of corruption or a reminder of a threat. It was just home again. As she turned the corner to head back, she saw a young police officer walking the beat. He was new, his face still holding the earnestness of a rookie. He was different from Rizzo in every way. His posture was open, not aggressive. He nodded to an elderly man sitting on his stoop, a gesture of friendly recognition, not intimidation. As the officer passed Zara, he met her gaze. There was no challenge in his eyes, no suspicion. There was only a calm, professional acknowledgement. He gave her a slight, respectful nod. Zara nodded back. In that simple exchange, she saw the future she had fought for. It wasn't a future without police, but a future with a different kind of policing, one built on respect, not fear. She hadn't just taken down a dirty cop. She had helped create a small pocket of the world where justice wasn't just an abstract concept, but a tangible, living thing. The work was far from over. Her whiteboard at the office was already filling up with new names. But here in this small corner of the city, a battle had been won. And as she walked back to her mother's house, under the quiet glow of the streetlights, she felt a profound sense of hope. She had faced the darkness and had not only survived it, but had used it to bring a little more light into the world.